No, I know.
Hey, how did
Pleasure as ever is ours, Frederick.
How did your session go? I'm sorry I missed it, but I like you a lot, but not enough to get up at 4:30 in the morning.
You are forgiven, Brenda. You are amply forgiven. You have lots of brownie points. Yeah, so you've hardly given up on any of them, Brenda.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Veris, hello.
Unmute, just changing screens, bear with me.
It's so nice to see people turn their cameras on. Otherwise, we feel like we're talking into a void. So we just pretend you're all smiling and nodding.
Petri, very good afternoon to you.
Hi, Arthur. How are you?
Very well. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How is Finland today?
Bloody cold.
I thought that was a prerequisite until you got to June, Petri.
Never getting used to it.
So I always feel like we need to honor those who do show up on time. So perhaps we can start with the Catalyst video while we wait for others to join. And I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can do that, Len.
Yes, thank you. We just have a quick welcome video that we want to share with you guys. So I will be sharing that in just a moment.
I'm assuming all of you have attended other sessions. So you've probably seen this video. So feel free to nod off or drink your coffee.
Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week. This year's Catalyzing Change Week is about solutions from the front lines by social innovators.
In 2022, Catalyst 2030 concentrated its efforts on bringing proximate leaders and frontline solutions to the forefront. Collaborations led by members from the Global South produced groundbreaking reports on climate and transforming education, with an emphasis on offering local solutions. We continued our mission to create an enabling environment for social entrepreneurs to flourish by initiating a letter to donors, signed by more than 1,200 social entrepreneurs and innovators. The Catalyst 2030 awards ceremony was spectacular, and the awards themselves welcomed by the private sector, governments, bio multilaterals and donors.
Catalyst 2030 as a movement is disruptive.
One of the best things I think that's come out of Catalyst 2030 so far is incredible collaboration across the ecosystem that just didn't exist before Catalyst came into being.
The thing I love most about Catalyst is that it's an open movement for social entrepreneurs around the world.
I'd encourage anyone who's looking to be more connected with their local communities around social development goals to come along to Catalyzing Change Week.
Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week.
Thank you. Okay, we shall get started. I'm just going to go back and share my screen now. There we go. So welcome to Moving Beyond Projects and Broken Systems. So this is really about prioritizing systemic collaboration and futurism. So thinking about the future, which is sometimes the piece that I know we've missed over the years. So we have 3 presenters today, but a lot of the time is going to be spent gathering feedback and talking to one another. The first section is really about what we've learned about big picture system challenges and solutions. A lot of it has come from the front line. I know Diane Clark and I have worked for many, many years in terms of having the boots on the ground, in terms of change and collaboration. So it's really about why thinking holistically is essential for achieving the SDGs. And a lot of these learnings have also been shaped by Catalyst and being a member of Catalyst. So that's really how we connected with Arthur. This has very much been shaped by the work that Frederick is leading with Catalyst as well. So we want to make sure that we share that. So the thinking about why holistic and the how-tos for how do you do this? Because I think a lot of us agree. I'm guessing you agree, that's why you're here. And so we're going to share the essential key impacts that we found. And there are 10 of them. So hang on, but we've done our darndest to simplify what can be a very complex process. Arthur is going to join us in terms of talk. He's the money guy, and he's going to talk to us about systemic collaboration and financing that. He's the money guy. And as I said, a lot of this session is going to be about idea exchange and figuring out how we can mobilize greater action towards what's missing. And we see that what's missing as being policy and funding and the support required for prioritizing systemic collaboration and what we're now calling sector connectors. So we made a conscious decision not to spend a lot of time sharing our backgrounds. All we want to say, when we've got our websites here, as well as our LinkedIn links, and I think Diane has put our LinkedIn links in the chat. And I'm doing a lot of the talking for the first part of the session, but I just also really want to stress how much this has been influenced by my business partner, Diane. I do the talking, but she's doing a lot of the brilliant thinking and strategizing behind this. So just so that you know, I am the principal collaborator and founder of Campus for Communities of the Future. I'm also the chair of the Canada chapter of Catalyst 2030. My areas of impact have been primarily community development, systemic collaboration, and strategic foresight. And Diane, over to you. And we allowed ourselves 2 bullet points to introduce ourselves. So we're trying to be very concise here. So Diane.
Thanks, Brenda. I'm CEO and Chief Digital Strategist for Transpire, a company I created too many years ago to count. I'm a longtime project manager, having the privilege of providing technology leadership to several exciting multi-million-dollar multilingual collaborative ventures, leading to stakeholder-informed decision-making, which is what Brenda and I are so passionate about.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, Arthur, can you do this in 2 sentences?
Absolutely.
You've got a very extensive background.
My name's Arthur Wood, spent 20+ years in the City of London doing product development and change management. Joined Ashoka as a leadership group member, created Social Financial Services, founding partner of Total Impact Capital. Partner is John Simon, former head of OPIC. We've done about $500 million worth of structures. And currently, which is what I'll talk about today, we've set up a new entity called Equity for Humanity, which is a systems approach to financing.
Nice. Thank you. That's great. So the thing that might be most important for you to know about all 3 of the presenters, and I want you to think about this as well in terms of yourself, but we have always, and I think what we have in common is that we are system thinkers. I'm guessing you might be too. And so our approach to thinking about the big picture has always been holistic. It's been about our head and our hearts and our hands. And for us, the heart part, we often lead with that. For us, what that translates to is empathy and kindness and respect. The head part is that we are really focused on research and informed decision making, as Diane mentioned. And the hands part is that for us, it's been a lot of boots on the ground for many years. So the hands part, and in particular, as a result of Diane's influence, there's been also a real focus on digital capacity for making that happen. So for us, holistically is about leading with heart, head, and hands. So my next question for you, and you can just add this to the chat. Right now, this is your question. Right now, what's predominant in your thinking? Is it your head, your heart, or your hands? And why is that? Oh, we're thinking already. And Diane, can you help me with, because I have too many screens open now. Are you able to share some of what we see in the chat? Well, I guess maybe I could try to open it.
If you want to post your thoughts in the chat, I can raise them or perfect.
Yes, Deepa, thank you. Oh, the lawyers would explain the need, the reason for working with your head. Yes, okay. Oh, yes, and Debbie, catalyzing change work, yes. Yes. I have so much respect for your team. There is so much going on. I'm not sure how you're managing, but good for you. Oh, Frederick, that's interesting. Head for sure, but your heart sustains it. Okay. And Howard, thank you. Yes. Yes, given the work that you do, I would say yes. For you, they're so intertwined, aren't they? Yes. Okay. Well, that's a good start. Just something for you all to think about. But I also hope that you'll see how that's reflected in the work that the three of us are doing. And my slide, there we go. Okay, so I wanted to start with this slide because I think what it does more than anything is convey how complicated the challenges that we're all facing in the world right now, or in our communities and everything in between. So how many of you are facing one or more of these issues? Yeah, we see. Okay, I'm seeing. Yeah, and that's why we might be stressed for sure. So today's challenges and opportunities really are complicated. They're very, very complex, as are the SDGs. And what we're seeing is the importance of being holistic in terms of going beyond standalone projects. It's not to say that projects aren't important, but a systemic, holistic approach is going to be important. And I remember the first interview that I had with Catalyst, and I'm not sure if they're still doing this, but at the time when I applied to be a member of Catalyst, you had to be interviewed and accepted to become a member. And one of the questions they asked me was, what of the 17 goals are you most interested in? And for me, it was kind of a no-brainer question, because all of these SDGs are complicated and they're all interlinked. But for me, it was number 17 because of these all being interlinked. If we didn't prioritize and figure out how to ensure effective partnerships and collaborations, we weren't going to be able to achieve the other 16. And so that's so much that has been such an influence for me, because we seem to embrace the idea that we need to collaborate more, and that has certainly been a theme and something that we've heard consistently throughout this conference. And yet, siloed approaches to policy, to funding, and in recognizing the expertise that's needed for collaboration, we're still focused on silos. So in a hierarchy that supports silos as well. So that's what we've been up against, as have you, I'm sure, and it's complicated. So we worked really hard to hopefully unpack it a bit. So what we do know is that people care about their communities. And your community can be at the geographic level, but there's other ways of looking at communities regionally or provincially or even nationally. within one sector or cross sectors. And I think most people in our experience are aware that community delivery systems are often broken, but they may not know how to fix them. And I was reminded recently by a futurist colleague of mine, he tried to be somewhat, and he said, you know, Brenda, the systems really aren't broken. Most of them are doing exactly what they were designed to do. But they were designed for the industrial era. So they're very top down, very hierarchical. And so they're just not working for the time in history that we live. So we know this is about the systems, but we also found out, and the way we've organized our findings, because as a result of our practice-based learning, what we saw is that when communities, however you define them, have key principles in place and some key foundational capacities, and have determined specific priorities that we'll talk about, when those are in place, we're able to accelerate and scale the success that we're seeing. So here's the key impact statements for not only achieving the SDGs, but for community and economic development. And this one slide really summarizes everything that we want to share with you, but not all the detail. So we're going to share these 10 key impact statements that are on this slide, and we're going to expand on them somewhat with typically one slide for each of the 10. So this is a lot of information that we're showing you and sharing with you, but we think it will appear, once we unpack each of them with an additional slide, that it will become much clearer. So the first one we're going to talk to is about the principles, and this is not us making them up. This is not academic research. Well, there is a lot of academic research in this, but this is a result of us making a concerted decision to observe what was working in 60 different communities across Canada. So in small rural communities, in neighborhoods and large urban centers, in northern Indigenous communities. So this is what we observed, that there was a commitment to 3 principles. Each of the communities that we saw where there was success, well, and I guess I just want to pause for a sec, because here's the other thing. What we also learned, that 10 key impact statements might seem overwhelming, but what we saw is in the majority of communities, they were probably doing 80% of the right things. And so I always want to lead with that, because I think it makes it a little bit less intimidating, because we're doing a lot of the right things. But this is the picture on the top of the puzzle box. We have a lot of good pieces of the puzzle. This is the picture on the top. So what we saw in the communities that were successful is that there was the principle that was driving it was collective intelligence. There was a belief that we needed to tap into and hear all voices in that community, all stakeholders. The second one was a commitment to systemic collaboration. They understood they couldn't do this by themselves, and they needed to connect all of the sectors and in their community. The third commitment was that they were not satisfied with the status quo. They said we can and we ought to do better. And that principle was really captured in them being committed to breakthrough innovation and transformative change. So those are the 3 principles. The 3 foundational elements are really much more about capacity. And so it's great to have those principles, but does your organization or your community have the foundational elements in place to be able to do them? And so the fourth key impact statement was that there needed to be, and when there was an investment in growing leadership capacity at all levels. And it wasn't leadership meaning leaders only with the titles. It was the behavior that we saw. One of my futurist colleagues, Peter Bishop, always says that leadership is not a title, leadership is a behavior. And some of the most impactful leaders we saw were those who did not have a title, but were making things happen in their communities. But it's that investment and the understanding that we need to invest in that training. The fifth one was an organizational capacity. Does your organization have the capacity to work externally with other partners? And that's something a lot of times we're really tied up with the internal capacity of our organizations or businesses or governments. And the fifth one was trusted relationships and a culture of collaboration. And then, when those are in place, and a lot of times a lot of those are in place, it was really about focusing on 4 priorities. And we saw this consistently, is that communities were successful when there was community and people-led development, when there was cross-sector and multi-sector practice. The 9th one was strategic foresight. We found a lot of times people were busy in the here and now, but hadn't been giving a lot of thought to the future. And I think one of the luckiest things I had was an opportunity to connect with futurists around the world who really have shaped our thinking around this. And then, of course, and thank goodness for Diane, so much of this is about digital optimization, the technology piece that's important, that needs to be a priority. And Diane, what's the percentage that you say that you've learned that an organization should spend on digitizing?
Yeah, according to several studies, worldwide studies, from 4 to 6% of gross revenues in a year should be spent on technology, whether it's software, hardware, or IT resources. And a lot of organizations aren't spending quite enough to get return on investment.
Yeah, especially nonprofits and governments. And so that's one of the things we're seeing is that they're getting further behind. Yeah. Okay, so far so good, I'm hoping. Okay, people smiling and nodding. That is great. I love it when your cameras are on so we can see that. Thank you for doing that. Okay, so now we're in the unpacking stage of each of those 10s. And feel free to interrupt with any questions that you might have, because we're going to go through this rather quickly. But the first principle, the key impact statement, is collective intelligence. And this was for us breakthrough thinking in a lot of ways. And this was because, I think typically when we talked about multi-sectoral and systemic collaboration, we all knew about the three sectors. We typically talked about nonprofit or the social sector. We talked about the government sector. We talked about the business sector. And what shifted for us was thinking, where are the consumers in this picture? And we're not even sure if consumer is the right word. We didn't use the word citizen because in some indigenous communities, they don't consider themselves as citizens of a country. But it is, I think, accurate to describe the 4th sector as being consumers, because when you think about it, and think about yourself even, as a consumer, you are buying products from the business sector, you're supporting them. Through your taxes and through your donations, you're supporting the nonprofit sector. And we're definitely all supporting the government sector with our taxes and by electing representatives. And so, so much of this was really understanding that we needed to put consumers at the center of this equation in a lot of ways. And we need to give them more of a priority, not have them be an afterthought. So that's the collective intelligence. Because what we learned is that each of those sectors have different priorities. And if we're going to get to collective intelligence, it's only when, and we saw this firsthand, it's when those 4th sectors come together. They come together with different pieces of the puzzle. They come together with different assets, different priorities, different lenses, different experiences, different wisdom. And when that collective comes together, there's some incredibly magical synergy that happens. And as a result, there's also more buy-in and more collaboration. And so that piece was fundamental and is fundamental. The second principle is about collective intelligence. And the collaboration, we know it's all important, and we all know about the importance of networking and trust building, but I'm not sure that I knew that there was different kinds of collaboration. But in one of my first conversations with a futurist in the US, he said to me, Brenda, he said, you do know there's 2 kinds of change. And I said, No, I did not. I did not. But he said to me, there's two kinds of change. There's change that reforms. And what that is, and it's really where most of our energy and resources are going these days, are projects that ensure we do things more efficiently and more effectively. And so for sure, there is a need for that kind of collaboration. So cooperation and traditional collaboration, because we need change that reforms. Where we aren't as strong is with change that transformative change. That's where we get to breakthrough innovation and being able to resolve more complex issues. And collective impact is critical in a lot of cases because it does deal with a specific issue and brings multiple organizations, multiple stakeholders together to resolve a particular issue. Where we saw a need for something different is systemic collaboration. And that's really much more about bringing together all of the four sectors that we just talked about to be able to make more informed decisions and to ensure and really nurture a readiness for the collaboration that needs to happen. Okay.
May I interrupt for a sec? Ask a question?
Yeah. Yes.
Could you go back 2 slides?
Yeah.
Actually, that's fine. Okay. So just one note, the consumer sector is dominated by media consumption. That lives in there, right?
Probably.
Because that's a larger contributor to learning than school is by far.
Yep.
It's one thing to think about. And then go to the second slide, please, or the next one. I think that systemic collaboration worked beautifully, or has worked beautifully, for the Trump Republican side with Fox News and government and all of that. So there is an example. Whether or not it's an example to anybody's taste is a different thing, but it does work. It works in authoritative. We have examples of it where it works really, really well, but not necessarily for the public good.
True.
So
I do.
Is that what you mean? Am I getting it right?
Yeah, I do agree, except I think this will become clearer. I think what's missing in that case has been diversity. And I think they're making decisions on the basis of consensus rather than anything else, right? So yeah, but good point. I appreciate that. Okay, so we're here. So what we saw is that breakthrough innovation and transformation is more likely to occur when, and again, I'm not sure how much Trump involved all four sectors and diversity within those four sectors. So Howard, to come back to your point, but what really became clear to us is that when these four sectors intersect and overlap and ultimately merge, that we're more likely to get to innovation and transformation. And I think it's because they each have different priorities more than anything. And we need all of those voices to be heard. Okay. So we'll move from the principles to digging a little bit deeper about those foundational elements. And this really speaks to the importance of investing in growing leadership. And I think one of the challenges is really understanding that people who live in a community or your stakeholders are really an amazing source of intelligence and potential leaders in your communities. And so, but we don't all have the competencies, the skills, and by that I mean skills, knowledge, and attitudes to work collaboratively. It's a new discipline in so many ways. And I think there are many of you probably on this call who are doing that grassroots work at the grassroots level as community builders, ensuring community-led development. But we were never really taught that. A lot of that was things that we learned off the side of our desk and by the seat of our pants. But there is an investment that's needed in leadership. And if you're asking what that leadership looks like, well, we spent years, I hate to tell you how many years, really thinking of finding, researching, and every time we did anything in any community across the country, we always asked people, what do you want to see in a leader? or think about a leader that you admire. What is it you're seeing in terms of their skills, their knowledge, and their abilities? And we ultimately crafted 8 competencies, which are shown here, and I'm not going to go into them, but this is what we have seen is needed for the future. I've also used these with young leaders, and they so understand this and so want this. So what we have done is that we've not only articulated these outcomes, but each of the outcomes has indicators attached to them. So there's a better understanding of what that means. We have developed curriculum for different audiences that has been well tested over many years as well. So a lot of this work, and not to say that it can't be improved. I think everything we've been doing has been has been a resource in motion for sure, but it does seem to be working, and it seems to be a missing piece. In a perfect world, we would like to see this at the secondary and the post-secondary level, probably as a micro credential that anyone from any discipline could add to their existing degree or diploma. The other capacity that we mentioned is around organizational capacity, and it's the organizational capacity for working externally. And we've developed this tool with a lot of others that we are working with, and most of them were consultants who had specific areas of expertise, whether it was human resources or marketing or technology, and pulled it all together in one assessment tool. So just know that that is available. And again, we found that most organizations and businesses had a lot of this. They had 80% probably on average. And so it was help them identify not only their strengths, where they were strong, but also where they needed to do more work. Okay. The sixth one, again, to come back to building trusted relationships and a culture of collaboration. And this is about building on what's strong. I have removed the phrase needs assessment from my vocabulary because it's not about what we don't have. It's building on what's strong. So every group of stakeholders that we work with, the first question we typically ask is, what do you love about your community? Totally changes the dynamic in the room. Building on what's strong, not what's wrong. It's focusing on communities as a system and typically determining the priorities before we go into any specific projects. It's really nudging people to think about their community as a broader ecosystem rather than one silo. And it's empowering the community to determine the priorities. It shifts decision making as well, and I think this is Howard, the point that I was trying to make earlier is that the decision making has to shift away from consensus of the majority to an equity lens, and I think that sometimes it has been the missing piece. The way that we're seeing, or probably the simplest way for us to explain this, and again, this was very much shaped by Diane Clark, who is a certified project manager with PMI. For those who aren't familiar with PMI, it's an international organization that certifies, I see people nodding, that certifies project managers around the world. And so this is their project triangle. And there's much more to it, but it's a simple way of conveying the components that they see as needing to be in place for quality initiatives. It's a triangle that focuses on 3 things. It focuses on the scope of your project or initiative, the time or schedule, and the budget or the cost. And where we saw there was success and a greater culture of collaboration and opportunity for building trusted relationships was looking at the scope differently. It was fine if the project team was in charge of the time and the schedule, and it was okay if senior leadership was okay with the budget and controlled the budget, because that's always what makes them nervous. But where we saw there was greater success was with the scope, that before anything was determined, it was important to go to your stakeholders, your citizens, and engage them in determining the scope, because that got the buy-in, that got the collaboration, that reduced potential for conflict. And too often we've seen the experts determine the scope and then go to the community, and it's blown up in their faces. And people push back because they weren't involved. But if they're involved at the beginning, you not only get a better product or a better project, you get more buy-in and more collaboration. The last four are about the priorities that we saw that were impactful. And so it was about community-led development. This has been so reinforced by Catalyst, and I'm so grateful to have met so many people within Catalyst who have shaped this. But it is really about making community-led, people-led, sometimes we call it, community-led, people-led. Don't get hung up on the taxonomy of this, but it's really empowering those who are going to be impacted by the work. And there's different ways of thinking about community-led development. I know in my first job working in local government, I was a little taken aback because I wasn't running any programs. I didn't have staff reporting to me. I didn't have facilities, but this was my job. My job was to work with the broader community and the community groups and citizens in a lot of different ways, which are articulated on that slide. And this was unusual, I think, at the time to have that kind of role. But in hindsight, what I was doing, and I know what Diane has done as well, is that we have been what we are now calling sector connectors. And so our job was critical for both community and economic development. And it really is a new discipline, because our job was to bring together those different sectors and listen to them and support them and coach them. So it's a different role. So what I'm going to stop here, because what I want to do is ask you to answer this question in the chat. Are you or your organization a sector connector? And if you're up for it, why or why not? Are you or your organization a sector connector? And I'll go to the and now for some reason, Diane, I don't know if you can help me out. I can't see the chat.
Yeah, certainly. We have several who are posting here saying, yes, we try. Debbie saying a lot of connections between members in Catalyst 2030. With more time and staff, we could connect at a greater level. Yes, but currently limited way to provide. So I think the general consensus is yes.
Yes. But I thank you. I really appreciate that feedback, because I think you've identified what we've identified, is that, yeah, we can do this, but whose job is it? Where's the policy that supports sector connectors? Where's the funding to support multi-sector collaboration? And I know I got slapped on my wrist a number of times because I was moving outside of the defined definition of my role, whether I was working at a community college or for local government or for a nonprofit. So that's just important to keep in mind, because we see that as a potential solution as well. So this, this role of the sector connector, as we saw it and what we observed, was that it's about connecting the grassroots to the grass tops. And again, that's really important for making informed decision making. And it is about, as a sector connector, what we're doing is supporting and advocating. It's a lot of times it's a coaching role. And it's also about encouraging bigger picture system thinking. And it's also about recommending tools, resources, and technology. So those who are trying to do the work of systemic collaboration are supported in some way. The ninth priority, or the ninth impact, is the key impact statement is about strategic foresight. And And as I mentioned, that's something that is often missing, that we don't think about the future. And I think it used to be okay because we could kind of struggle through at the grassroots level, but now more than ever, the world totally is flat. The issues are so complex that we have to think about the future. And I think one of the most important takeaways I learned from the futurists that I work with, that if we don't think about the kind of future we want to have, and we don't teach our kids about the kind of future they want to have, somebody else will do it for you, and you might not like the results. And so we really need to think about futurism in terms of what's happening in the world, but also in terms of our own values and the outcomes that we want to see. And the last one is digital optimization. Diane, do you want to speak to this slide? Because this is definitely your area of expertise.
Yeah, certainly. And questions about where are the digital tools for multi-sector collaboration? They're everywhere right now. Pretty well everything is possible technically, from the most rudimentary tools to the most sophisticated with AI and several other initiatives. But it's not, I do recommend tools to a lot of organizations, but it is about that digital goals are the same as business goals. They're really one and the same thing. Once you've established your organizational goals, your ultimate project goals, those should become your digital goals as well, or your technology goals, because communication and relationships are so integrated with technology and supported by technology. So, as an outcome from using digital tools, there's rich data that results. So that applies and provides for informed decision making. And as a result of that, better policy making from that data and from that engagement, communication and relationship building. So technology really does play a big role, and as long as it's optimized and the correct tools are chosen in each, you can't really say this is the best tool. It's whatever the tool, whatever the process is determined to be. There is a combination of tools, integrated tools, or one tool that will meet that need. We have, really just use AI to ask the question, which tool should I use for this purpose? And you'll get several results. And if anyone requires help with that, there's lots of help around the world with determining which one is the best. But lots of choice, and I think that choice is overwhelming. But with a sector connector, that's what they can do, is help determine which is the best tool to use for a process or for the current conditions.
And that's why I love working with you, Diane, because you are technology agnostic and always make recommendations based on what we're looking for. So I really do appreciate that. Okay, so that's our that's our 10. Those are our 10 key impact statements. I'm hoping that made sense. I need to turn things over to Howard in just a minute, but I just wanted to pause here and see if you have any questions or comments. And I think we can do this, that there aren't, we can do this as a group and just do it informally and put your hand up or just unmute and speak. Oh, there's Howard. I can see. Go ahead.
I'm not sure that we didn't cover it already. I had those questions at the beginning, but if you want me to talk about something else, I will.
Go ahead. Comments. You can just add a comment. That's good.
Yeah. I think this is terrific, and I don't say that easily. So good work. I'm anxious to hear how the finance side of it works through. I'm so curious also how learning among children and teenagers flows through this, which is the area that I'm mostly focused on, and how we do it in places where it's just not easy to get internet, which is like half the world. So if I'm going to be a consumer, if I'm going to interact with government and all that, we need means to do that. And, that in many cases means reliable electricity or a quiet place to work. It's not just the connectivity. So I think this is really good, and I'm anxious to see sort of the next layers, but you and I will also talk about that separately in the
I'd love to talk to you about that. And I don't know, just to this is for us, that's learning is all framed around the 8 competencies that we shared. How you get there for your particular audience is adjusted. But we delivered this in across the north in the 3 northern territories here in Canada, in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. And we were actually using the phones. There are phones there. So a lot of what we were doing was on the conference calls, really. But we also even used fax machines for them to share. So you just have to adapt based on the technology you have. But I think all the time that is improving. And so we don't want to, we find a workaround, I guess, more than anything. But thank you, because I think
optimistic. Thank you.
yes, yes, yes. But I do think that we, my colleague Peter Bishop said that, in almost every school in the world, we teach history, but he said we don't teach the future. And I think a lot of what we're sharing, those competencies are about teaching the future. And what we see is when kids feel they have some control over their future, and they think about that future in a concrete way with activities that have been designed to do exactly that, then they leave with hope. And that's so critical. And it's an outcome that we had not anticipated. So yes. Okay, so now Arthur, the money guy. So here's your slides, Arthur. We know you are the money guy. I've learned so much from you. I don't think I can speak finance yet. And honestly, you do hurt my brain a lot of times, to be honest, but I'm getting it. And I'm really looking forward to how you're going to share. Okay, can you unmute? You got to unmute. I think you're muted.
That's not a competent start. Good afternoon. I'll try not to hurt your brain, Brenda. I'm sure that's very unlikely. Finance is fear and greed in some senses, and the rationalization of fear and greed. But let me sort of run through. I'm going to reinforce a number of points that you have made in this process. And let me start with potentially the problem from Mr. Clinton up on that quote there. The problems of the 20th century have been solved by someone, somewhere. You can see that inside Catalyst. The challenge of the 21st century is how we scale them. Equity for Humanity is a collaboratory of about 20 organizations and experts from, sorry, can you go back?
Sorry.
It's a collaboratory of about 20 organizations, technology from CERN in terms of complex visualization, Frederick's work in terms of feedback loops, former regulators in terms of legal frames. And the game we're in is really about how can we provide the tools to think at a systems level, to move away from silos, as you said, Brenda, to actually thinking about holistically. And the reason we call it 4 is there's 4 elements to it, because if you're going to think at a systems level, you have to think about how you look at systems data. You have to think about what is the legal framework that moves us away from this for-profit, not-for-profit paradigm, the one that allows you to have for-profits, not-for-profits, corporates, all collaborating within the same frame. You've got to think how you engage the community to think about system planning. We've used the word consumer. I would say that in terms of the well-being of all, there are 3 social communities. One is the social intermediaries, second is the social entrepreneurs, and 3 is the community themselves as an empowered consumer, auditor of the social goods they receive, as opposed to charitable beneficiaries. So those are the 4 elements. It's around systems data, system legal, systems planning, and how we integrate the community, and systems innovation, which is the reason that we have the relationship with Catalyst. Good news today, you'll see the logo of the Geneva Center for Security Policy, which is where we are hosted. They have given formal approval actually today for us to launch a feasibility study, which is based with them. They're effectively a Swiss government NGO. And Accenture today has also agreed that they will do the final validation of the model, which I'm going to explain to you today. And as you'll see tomorrow, I did this presentation earlier this month to the Club of Rome and Graduate Institute. So we go to the next slide, Brenda. Why is it necessary? Well, Catalyst 2030, we focus on the Catalyst bit, but 2030, how are we actually doing? Now, we've all heard, you know, the trillions of dollars that's theoretically being mobilized by ESG. We've all heard lines that apparently the impact investment market has grown at a compound rate of 62% per annum, if you believe GSG, sorry, if you believe GIN, or 82% if you believe GSG. But the practical reality is, ladies and gentlemen, is that in 2015, it was estimated we needed about 2.5% of GNP to achieve the 2030 goals. Today, that same figure is around about 8% of global gross domestic product, because we have failed quite conclusively to hit all the targets. I mean, if you think about it, inequality has blossomed from 2008, when I more or less joined the sector, from about 100,000 people owning about the same amount of wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion, to today roughly round about 6 people. If we look at climate, we're heading for 1.5. In fact, over the Arctic and Antarctic is already well over above that. Investment is now in place to actually hit 2.5 degrees by 2050. And in terms of the SDGs, we've actually gone backwards quite conclusively, which compounds the financial problem. So, you know, sitting here doing nothing and sitting within our silos is clearly not working, and it's not an option, despite the spin that you get from a whole range of venture capitalists. Nothing wrong with the venture capital model, but it has come to frame the way we've looked at this market, and indeed blended value, which you're hearing a lot about. Again, very important. But if there's only 0.5% of subsidy, which is roughly the calculation in all the ODAs, the overseas development aid, and around about 0.5% in global foundations in terms of the current system, and our problem is 8%, then you've got to leverage the money 16 times. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not going to happen in the reality. So it's not a question of us saying, is systems thinking important or nice? It is absolutely critical if we actually leave 2030 and we actually want to solve the problem. So next slide, Brenda. Brenda's talked a lot about futurism. I happen to like history. Congratulations to anybody who can identify who all these individuals are. It's Burke, Churchill, Patton, Satayana, Karl Marx, and Confucius. Not normally a group that you would see linked together, but they have all said in one way or another that if you wish to understand the future, you have to understand the past. And the further you, to quote Churchill, the further you go back in history, the better you can actually predict what's going to happen in the future. So let me, if I may, Brenda, move to the next slide and show you my favorite picture. If you happen to be in Florence in the near future, you'll see the picture by Niccolò da Michelino in the Duomo. And it's a picture of Dante holding his Purgatorio e Paradiso. And on the left side, he's gesticulating to the circles of hell. And on the fourth circle of hell, you find blasphemers, sodomates, mass murderers, and bankers. On the right-hand side, he's looking at the Duomo that was built by Medici, the banker. So you actually understand underneath the very structure that was funded. And to me, this picture somewhat crystallizes how we think about philanthropy traditionally. You know, we make money on one side and then we save our soul by giving it on the flip side of the equation. So a traditional view of for-profit, not-for-profit, that has its roots deep in Islamic culture and Christian culture, 1350, Treaty of Nicaea and all that stuff. It also has another interesting element to it, that Medici was also the person that created the bond market. Just prior to Medici, we'd actually had a social banking system. It had come out of the crisis between the church and the state, with the church trying to create a perpetual revolution from the Roman Crusades. What was created at a financial level of that was the Templars, who created the first letters of credit, the banking system, trusts. All these things came from the Crusades. That collapsed, and then just after that, you had the creation of the bond market. Well, the bond market is essentially first used to finance city-states to fight city-states. Its ultimate expression was the clash between the French and the English. And ask yourself why a wet, soggy island in 1750, half the size of La France, became and a quarter of the size of the economy at that time, became the dominant power 75 years later. It was partly a function of the financial tools, an efficient financial system, an efficient taxation system, an efficient central banking system that led to the rise of the Anglosphere. In much the same way, today we talk about Bretton Woods as the fundamental element and guider, and we look at it through national silos. The problem is that because of its success in somewhat, the system is essentially bankrupt. If you look at the huge unfunded pension and health liabilities in all Western governments, and indeed China with a lagging period, there quite simply is not enough money. So if we think that, and that's going to get worse because of aging populations, if we think the money is going to come in the traditional way from the central system, it's simply not going to happen. So the problem is we need to think about actually how do we actually motivate. Now, what history tells us is that the change has come through financial legal innovation and technology innovation that has been driven by a political need. And in our case, we are faced with a very clear political need. It is the existential threat that we are faced with by climate. And a reality that despite all these events we go to, I went to an OECD event recently, where they were talking about WASH. Well, if the WASH problem under the SDGs is 1.6 trillion, and there's only 180 billion in ODA in total, and WASH gets 10% of that, and sanitation gets 10% of that, it doesn't take the brains of an archbishop to realize that we're not going to solve the problem, not even by 2030 or 2090, in terms of that mechanism. Next slide. So we need to think about this, but when we think about this, we can't just drive it by business interests, which is very much how the debate is going at the moment. If you read the last G7 report last year, it even said that the asset managers should become the principals in these transactions. When you look at the metrics mechanisms that are being proposed at the moment, they're written very much with the agenda of the corporate sector in mind. So we need to, and I think you've made the point, Howard, and Brenda made the point, is that it is absolutely critical that we hardwire the social mission into this framework. So what we're trying to do is to hardwire at the level of finance, at the level of technology, and at the level of legal, the social mission into the relationship. Next slide. So technology, somebody's touched upon it. I don't know if anybody's come across this before. Can anybody anybody got an idea what this is? Howard, you know what this is. Do you know what it is? You're on mute. You're on mute, Howard.
It's the cover of it's a brain image. It's used on the cover of the book Connectome.
It is a brain, well, it is a brain image. It's actually the linkage of all the relationships in Star Wars. And the reason I'm showing that is it's something as mundane as Star Wars can now be tracked and the relationship crystallized. And the technology that's been developed out of CERN, and they had to develop this technology because they were trying to procure for a problem that they didn't know the answer to. Interesting problem. If you're trying to solve the building blocks of the universe, you've got to procure technology. Done is allow you to visualize, exactly as almost been done here, visualize a complex system and to track the granularity inside that, one. And two, we have placed it inside a Swiss foundation. And three, it has been designed so that it can be used by social sector organizations. You don't need a coder to actually use it. And that's important because it makes, sorry, go back again, Brenda, back again, sorry. It makes it important that you can, what that allows you to do is therefore to look at a complex system, allow people to interrogate it. What it also means, which is absolutely critical, and you touched upon this, Diane, is that in the United Nations alone, there are 11 different metrics mechanisms that people are talking about. If you look inside the social sector, I attended an OECD event, I gave up counting at round about number 25. And they're all talking about that they've got their own silver bullet. Well, this is not what happened in banking. What happened in banking is that we take existing innovation and we provide a frame that allows people to integrate their various solutions, whether it be a financial product or indeed a metrics mechanism, and to white label it to leverage their own individual elements. And this is exactly what this technology does. And married to the type of tool that Frederick has developed in terms of feedback loops, married to the ability to look across all the social issues, as is provided by HDMI. We happen to work the Social Progress Index that takes it from the global down to actually even within a city itself. It ultimately allows you to create a data frame that is holistic, competitive, comparative, predictive. Well, before you ask me next slide whether I'm actually smoking something, we can move to the next slide, Brenda. This is actually what already happens in hard power. We obviously work in soft power, but this is what already happens in hard power. And you're actually seeing it played out on your TV screens every single day. This is I used to be a defense analyst back in my dim and distant youth, and I tend to keep an eye on the sector. This is a daring class anti-aircraft destroyer. It tracks 2,500 targets dynamically, allocates its weapon system as a function of the dynamic threat, locks into an F-35, which then gives you a whole battlefield overview. And then you probably read about the press, the various British and American spy planes flying across the border of Ukraine, sucking up data. This is a classic example where unless you actually get that data framing right, in terms of it being holistic, competitive, comparative, predictive, to allocate your resources, you are dead. But it is exactly the same mechanism that can be applied in the development sector. It's the same thing that the commercial sector has already applied. I worked on a comparable model inside the banking sector. What it means in the banking sector was you do not build another product in a silo. You take best practice, you plug and play it into an aggregated market. Any banker will tell you that the more aggregation you have, the more financial tools you can bring to bear. And you plug and play it into an offering you make. So you're doing two things. You're aggregating markets at a systems level, whether that be a water basin, whether that be a city, whether it be agriculture, etc., whether it be a SID. These tools can all be taken because they've been developed. The great thing about our sector is a huge innovation, but they try to build the whole value chain themselves. So as I say, the game we're in is around providing that technology, providing that legal framework, providing the access to innovation to ensure that people do not have to rebuild it themselves. So our conversations is not about trying to do a project, it's about finding existing intermediaries that already have scale on the ground and providing the tools to actually scale in exactly the same way as it is provided within the defense sector. Somebody touched upon Mr. Trump. This is exactly what Mr. Trump did in terms he would not have won the 2016 election without the use of Facebook, being able to granular and target advertising. He provided the exact same process, and I'll get onto this point, which is the reason that this thing needs to be rooted in a strict governance structure, is that you create a mechanism whereby it is important that you hardwire the social mission. If not, you get disinformation and fake news. So hardwiring that social mission is absolutely critical within the frame. Next slide.
Arthur, I hate to interrupt, but we do have a question. Lorraine has her hand up. Yep. And I also just wanted you to know that we probably, and I don't want to interrupt you, but we need this to be wrapped up in about 5 minutes, so we
that's fine.
We can join the breakout rooms. Okay.
You want me to take the question, Lorraine?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. I really appreciate what you're talking about, Arthur. And in my work in systemic innovation, one of the biggest challenges that comes up often is functional, legal, and political kind of requirements that don't get changed. And I wonder if you can speak to like models of ownership or collective, kind of how we can, like when I talk about, where are the tools for sharing, really what I mean is, we don't have a tool that allows people to share or innovate around budget lines. Often that's
if Brenda will give me 2 minutes on the 5 minutes, I will explain. The legal structure that we're talking about was designed by Mark Owens, the former head of the exempt unit of the IRS, and a financial regulator and a UK charity commissioner. It is based on LLC, LLP technology, limited liability companies, limited liability partnerships, which you find in 65 jurisdictions. There is a wide amount of commercial where this works commercially,
All we have done is add a social dimension into that structure and hardwire a social frame into that. What that allows is a legal structure, whether you're for-profit, not-for-profit, or government, can each take a different or indeed differing economic social return. Because if we want a social systems framework, you have to have a legal framework where each player can take a different or indeed differing economic return, but within an integrated framework. An LLC-LP is looked through for tax purposes. So each entity continues to be regulated within their frame, but it provides a holistic management frame. 1. 2, it is also the same legal structure I used to use in the City of London and is used in 100,000 structures, which is widely used in derivatives and financial constructions. And that is the reason that we call this social equity, because equity, so there's two meanings to equity in this conversation. One is the social equity and hardwiring into that. The second element of equity is that equity financially, 1, is fungible. What I mean by that is each player can take a different economic social return. 2, it is tradable. 3, it reflects the future value that is created by collaboration and working together. And again, Howard touched upon this. It's about the incentive structure, because unless we can actually granularize that incentive structure and capture the structural inefficiency and the cash flows that come from that collaboration, there's no mechanism to do it, as you've exactly read. So the legal building block is an absolutely fundamental element in what I've said. I didn't go into it because it gets you into the weeds, but I'm very happy to chat about it further. But it is absolutely fundamental and is a core part of the work. If we can actually think, therefore, at the systems level, the question then comes is, well, you know, where's the money? How do we create this marriage between the development sector and money? And I called it APE, hence the slide you see. What do I mean by that? Go to the next slide, Brenda. Where is the money? Well, it's about aligning local capital. There is roughly $5 trillion that sits in local pension funds in local markets that's effectively underlined. It's about aligning the foundations. Foundations have $2 trillion worth of assets, but only around about 5% of those are actually aligned in 95% of foundations. It's about aligning international capital. I can talk further about, and it's about providing a structure that allows you to align faiths that are also the 3rd largest investors in the world. So it's about aligning local capital, aligning institutional capital, and aligning faiths and foundations as much as catalytic capital providers as actual providers. The second of the P's is plug, play, and plan. Plug and play means you take existing innovation and plug it into aggregated markets. So you don't reinvent in silos over and over again. IP, agree, the whole conversation we have about IP and tangible and intangible value, Howard, in terms of your question. So you plug and play existing innovation into aggregated markets. You don't reinvent, you get rid of the structural cost inefficiency. You should be able to plan. There's work being done on this that says that can actually take 40% of the costs out of the SDGs. Well, that moves it from 8 to about 4%. 4% is about what the West spent at the height of the Cold War. So again, becomes politically feasible. And the third E is the externalities. What I mean by externalities are the future cash flows that come with 3 elements. Negative externalities. Negative externalities is really, unfortunately, where we're being pushed by the financiers, because what that means is that will create subsidy for banks and corporations to actually get a subsidy to manage something that's actually creating damage. What's being ignored in that conversation is the positive externalities, everything done in the social sector. And then 3, the value of the sequencing of those interventions. And if we were being honest and straight and really wanted to hit the SDGs, we should be taxing the negative externalities, subsidizing the positive externalities, and create a sequencing of externalities that the quicker you collaborate, the quicker you achieve the social outcome, the quicker return you make. And what do I mean by that return? You put $1 into education in India, it generates $50 of future economic value. You put $1 into wash, it creates $6 of future economic. You put $1 into TB, I could go on, it creates $40. These are the future cash flows that come with sequenced intervention. So our focus is the tools to crystallize that future cash flow value, to plug and play existing innovation into aggregated markets. And if you can, and three, do it in a way that does it in a cost structure. Four, on a technology frame that as you scale it, the unit cost falls and the predictability increases, exactly the same as Mr. Trump, exactly the same as the defense sector. Next slide. Next slide, Brenda, if there is one. Next slide. Hello. So this is what you end up with. The vision: enhance the well-being of all, social justice, climate, ecological change, delivered through 4 pillars. Somebody's talked about cultural transformation and youth, absolutely key, moving from me to we. I mentioned the 4 systems elements, then the key tools of distribution and scalability. And then what that enables you to do is to monetize the externalities, $3–5 trillion. We're talking literally the trillions in terms of the future value, calculated by McKinsey, Accenture, a whole range of folk. It mobilizes the $1.5 trillion that sits in foundations, opposed to just the 5%, the trillions of dollars that are in face. It addresses the structural inefficiency of our sector up to 40%. We can aggregate and align finance tools exactly as the bank has done. And finally, local currency. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the point is not capital. The innovation is there and the capital is there, but we need to have the legal and financial tools to actually draw it together in exactly the same way as the banking sector does, and exactly the same way as the defense sector has done for 30–40 years. And final slide. And this is the Chateau de Chillon, close to where I live. And the reason I put this is that this is the reason that Switzerland is an interesting country. Ask yourself why Switzerland is the country it is today and not like the Balkans. It lies on the fault lines of history, culture, and language. And it was because Switzerland, the French, the Italians, the Germans, and the Romansh all had to collaborate to work together, because if they control the mountain passes, they control the flow of trade. And that's the reason that Switzerland is built on collaboration, because the economic necessity of it was about controlling the flow. In much the same way today, the social sector needs to take control of its own data. It has it. It is inside all these institutions in their silos at WHO and UNICEF, the World UNHCR, WIPO, etc. It is on the ground in the local intermediaries, but they need to have the incentive structure, hence the importance of money, hence the point you made, Diane, and you made, Howard, to actually persuade them to work together. And that, in my view, is granularized equity, that the quicker you work together, the quicker you collaborate, and to recognize that. And if we fail to do this, if we fail to take control of that data, the big technology companies will simply hoover it all up, silo by silo, in terms of controlling it, one. And two, there is a very danger to the multilateral system, because the technology question will be, is this Chinese technology that's funding who? Is it American technology that's funding human rights? It's already happening. If you look what Palantir has done with the World Food Programme, so that the warning signs are already there. We know this is potentially going to happen in this sector, and that's the reason that we've been working with the CERN technology in terms of potentially presenting a facilitatory network empowered by the social sector to leverage what we already have. Our game is not to be, I don't know which of you are Star Trek fans, our objective is not to be the Borg, but it is to be the Borg that actually has a social mission, and to hardwire our community into that. If we continue in silos, continue in individual innovation, then it's wonderful and it's great, but it's going to be taken control of by the commercial sector and the banking sector. And indeed, that is already happening. And we need, in my view, to take control of our own data, to take control of our own data frames in a way that the social mission is hardwired within that frame, and link it to an incentive structure that gives it scale. I shall shut up now, Brenda. Apologies. I probably went on.
Oh, no, Arthur, it's fine. It's always so informative. And it's getting so much clearer for me anyways. And I hope it was for others as well. So thank you for that. Really do appreciate the complexity. And I love the fact that you're doing something about it, especially at the global level. So thank you. We have we have a little bit of time, not as much as we had hoped, but we do have, and I think the questions for Arthur can be folded into the discussion. And I think we might be better off just doing this as one larger group. Diane, would that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So what we really wanted to do is have with you some deeper discussion around what we're seeing as 3 key solutions, and 3 key solutions for supporting the work that, as you heard from Arthur and from us, that what we're seeing as being needed for work across sectors and silos and disciplines, and bringing all the different sectors together. So the first one is that we see, and this is where we need the brain trust that is with us today. We need your thoughts about what we see as being important, which is amplifying and sustaining the impact of sector connectors. Okay, because we're seeing that it's no one's job to bring the sectors and silos together and to make sure we hear from all voices when we're tackling these broader issues. The second thing is that we have a well-tested process for pilot communities, but what does that mean? Is that of interest? Are you aware of communities that are ready? And if not, how can we get people ready to be a pilot community for putting sector collaboration into place? And as well, what Arthur has articulated so well is a new philanthropic model. Your thoughts about that and how that can support capacity building and sustainability. So here's the questions that we had hoped we could address is, what do we need? What's needed for sector connectors to facilitate this? And what assets do you and your organization bring that would contribute to this? And if someone doesn't speak up, what we'll do is put you into smaller groups. Well, this seems like a better way to do it.
I have a very specific question for Arthur. You mentioned 5% of philanthropy dollars being in active use. Is that because I put together a foundation at one point, we were required to spend 5% of assets every year? Is that what you're referring to? Or in other words, do most philanthropies do the minimum and they hold on to the other 95, or am I thinking about this wrong?
It depends on the segment of the market you're talking about, Howard. If they're larger than 1.5 billion against the world, they tend to say, well, let's join the party. If you look at the segment 250 million to 1.25, you've got fantastic organizations like Heron, Kale Felicitas, 100% Club, that are talking about the whole alignment under mission-related investment, which is, I guess, partly what we're talking about at that level. And then below that level, below 200 million, there's resource constraints in terms of them taking up other models because of the complexity of the issue, to be blunt. There is, however, certainly in US law, the program related, our work was based on Mark Owens, who was the head of the exempt unit of the IRS, the US philanthropic regulator, for 10 years. And he took the US PRI code and integrated that into the LLC LLP. So what we're trying to do is that a foundation structure to a banker is a closed-end investment trust where 95% of the assets are unaligned and they give 5% away for tax purposes, exactly as you said. What we're trying to ensure is there is a legal structure that allows you to align 100% of your balance sheet and to leverage it to bring in other capital. And there is a huge, I can send it to you, a number of examples under the PRI code where those types of structures have been leveraged under the PRI code. The problem with the PRI code is that foundations are very resistant to it, partly because under the law passed in '67, I think it was, the individual is liable inside the foundation. The interesting fact is that in 70 years, the inland revenue has not moved against a individual or a foundation once. Why? Because the PRI code says that if you make an investment, it has to be higher risk than market. Well, if it's successful, who's going to sue who? Nobody. Yeah. If it screws up, it proves the fundamental tenet of the RS regulation has to be high risk. And yet this practice has grown up around that it's very risky to do. And I have to tell you, the two biggest resistors to what we were trying to do were the foundation PRI guys themselves. Because we went in and said, hello, I know you think you're selling a very complex bottle of Chateau Neuf de Pape. It's actually a can of Coke. We were about as attractive as a we were not deeply attractive, let me phrase it that way, because obviously they spent their entire time selling it was very complicated. We say actually it's easy to do. The other people that were difficult at the time was the Internal Revenue Service itself, because they quite like a foundation system. It's simple, tick in the box, thank you much, go away, nobody bothers us. And we were saying, actually, here's a mechanism. It's designed as a capital market tool. It's used as a capital market tool. It's going to make your life very complex and difficult. So they were initially quite resistant. So the point is that it is possible to create these types of legal structures and frameworks. And all we're trying to do, I don't like the foundation system very much, as you would have gauged, but what it is great is irrespective of whether you're dealing with education, human rights, housing, whatever, it's the same structure.
But
Thank you. Sorry, I really don't want to interrupt. I just want to make sure we get to Lorraine's question before we need to wrap up. But I think it's what you're talking about. We need to do something more in that area and expand on it with a richer conversation. Lorraine, jump in.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate this. And I want to preface just by saying, I am by no means any kind of expert when it comes to finance or even math. Really, I'm terrible at math. But what I've learned through doing the work of kind of multi-sector systemic kind of work is that I have to be able to understand these things. And I think that's actually what's kind of needed for facilitating multi-sector partnering. For me, I was never really interested in money or finance, but recognizing that one of the biggest challenges to any kind of systemic intervention is literally, funder expectations from organization to organization being very different and timelines of funding being different. So like people can't literally pool their money together to work on a problem because what's expected of their outcomes are so completely different that they just can't do it. And literally the tool for them to have a pooled fund that they can pull their money from so they can apply it however they want are so limited that they just don't have the financial tools to change this. My thinking was, oh, we need to rethink ownership and completely, break that down. But I love, Arthur, when you're talking about the LLC, because I think there's proof of concept that works. It's clearly has worked for a long time. So I'm really curious about how we can help people to understand more of this, like the numbers and the finance and how we can work together with technology that enables it. And when I say technology, I don't literally mean computers. I mean like the financial technology that enables it.
Absolutely.
The two are a mirror, because the legal structure is the mirror of the granularization that technology now provides. And if you're going to build a system, you have to have the reality that each player can take a different or indeed differing economic return. But you have to have them within a legal framework whereby they're incentivized to collaborate and work together. And the whole point about this model is that if you actually collaborate and work together, you generate a whole bunch of future cash flows, and then the instrument will reflect that future cash flow value. If you don't do that, then you get driven to what's happening now. What happened in 2014 is that the venture capital guys took the agenda over and they said, you need a GP LP structure. Oh, and by the way, we're the GP, so give us the subsidy. Yeah? So we've ended up in a mechanism whereby 90–95% of those guys want a for-profit return, immediate for-profit return, and they're subcontracting down to the social sector and government. So the risk ends up with government and the social entrepreneurs and the community, and they take the upside, which they understand. I mean, I'm an ex-banker. They understand that the value is in the future cash flows. They understand that the future value is in creating that aggregation and scale.
And that the agility that venture capital and entrepreneurship allows, I think, out indexes the kind of long-term investment of, you know, trying to create some kind of social good over time, which for me is one of the biggest problems of finance right now. Is like, it's so easy to get money to do something that's going to bring a return in, you know, a few quarters, but it's so hard to get funding for a 30-year project.
Well, the other problem is if you deal, everything to a banker is aggregation. If you speak about raising $1 million, 2 million or 5 million, inevitably you're stuck primary and venture capital models and PE models. The big money is in the pension funds. So if you want a conversation with a pension fund, you've got to be talking $100 million and replicable. Now that you can do at a city level or a water basin level or a SID level. It's very difficult to do it at the level of an individual social entrepreneur. So that's the cultural change element about actually working and collaborating and the incentive to collaborate and work together. And if you can do that, then you can inject a whole range of capital and risk market tools that you can't at 2 to 3 million. It's very simple. Any banker will tell you the more you can aggregate, the better you can risk you do, the more product sophistication, et cetera, but that's not the mindset. Certainly within the venture capital world, because the venture capital world, they want to capture the excess value. Yeah, this is about ensuring that the community that Brenda's so eloquently referred to gets a share in this collaboration and scaling. That the community is actually the ultimate auditor of this mechanism, which gets you to tackling corruption as well in the scheme of things.
Okay, wow, what a great conversation. I've learned a lot. I hope that you have too. Any other thoughts before we wrap up? And also just as a note, my email address is in the chat now. And if you're interested in continuing this discussion, because I think there's so much more we need to learn about policy, funding, and learning related to being sector connectors. And we think that may be a network unto itself. So if you're interested in that, just send a quick email and let us know. And we're putting the, platforms in place to be able to continue this dialogue. But any last thoughts as we close?
This was great. This was really, really good. Thank you all.
Thank you, Howard. Most appreciated. Well, thank you all. And I find I always learn every time. And I guess that's for me one of the most important benefits of collaboration and conversations. And I really appreciate that you made time for the conversations today. So have a great rest of the conference, and hopefully we will stay connected. So thank you all so very much.
Thank you very much for organizing it, Brenda, Diane.
Thank you, Arthur.